You may wonder whether or not we've had a Conservative government at all for the last 13 years, given an announcement today, the new rules as of today from the Ministry of Justice, toughening its stance so that transgender men, convicted of violence will be barred from female prisons under these new rules. Not only those convicted of sexual assault, but those jailed for any violence will now never be held in mainstream women's prisons. I mean, the fact this even needs to be said, I find mind-blowing. But there we are. Let's talk to Helen Joyce. She's Director of Advocacy at Sex Matters. She's also author of the brilliant book, Trans, When Ideology Meets Reality. Good morning to you.
Hi, Julia.
Thank you so much, as always, for joining us, Helen. I mean, the issue of trans prisoners has been very much, above the parapet over what's been going on with the SNP, Nicola Sturgeon's downfall, and indeed her possible likely replacement. So 3 candidates being asked about these issues. But it is extraordinary, isn't it, that the Justice Secretary should make an announcement that basically, if you're convicted of violence and you're a man, but you claim that you're living as a woman, that you shouldn't be entering a prison with women. The fact that there has to be a statement about this, and the fact that this has been happening, and no one thought there might be a risk, when there have actually been cases of women being sexually assaulted behind bars by male prisoners claiming to be trans women, is absolutely, it's flabbergasting, isn't it?
It absolutely is. It's one of those things that if you tell ordinary people, like if you were to say this on the doorstep while you were campaigning, oh, by the way, we're thinking of keeping rapists out of women's jails, do vote for me. People would say, what were you doing before? You were putting rapists in women's jails? This is the thing that we find most difficult in campaigning on this subject. People cannot believe it's even happening. Yeah. They think that you must have a tinfoil hat when you say they're putting rapists in women's jails.
Yeah, and also people say, well, there can't be that many people. No, and no one is saying that trans people are more likely to be violent or sexual predators. No, but an awful lot of violent and sexual predators do suddenly, as we've seen with recent cases, Isla Bryson and others, suddenly around the time they're charged with a violent sex crime, decide that actually it turns out all this time they've been living in the wrong body and they want to be a trans woman. Or once they get behind prison bars, they think, you know what, I think I'll get myself into a nice, better, easier regime in a women's prison. And there have been cases. This isn't as we had with the SNP and their bid for this gender recognition bill, where it was raised that there should be a motion at least that would, a part of the bill would be changed so that if you were convicted of a sex crime, you couldn't go into a women's prison if you claimed to be a trans woman. And no, that wouldn't happen. I mean, A, it had already happened. And
right.
B, there were 2 cases. There were 2 cases the very week that bill was in the news, which was, I think in lots of ways very lucky for campaigners like you and me that it did happen. But why do you think that so many politicians are willing to just ignore this key women's safety issue when the facts are obvious?
The whole thing unravels. If you say, except for rapists, then you're accepting that trans women aren't women like all other women. And by the way, you only need a very small number of people to transfer. There are 5 men in women's prisons in Scotland at the moment. 4 are murderers and 1 is a paedophile. This is not the normal profile of women in prison. There are 20 times more men in prison than there are women. So, you're talking about something that very rapidly becomes an issue, but politicians would prefer somebody else to have to deal with it. So what the Scottish politicians said is, we will do this case-by-case risk assessment, and it will be for the police and the prison service. So they're the ones who are passing the policy, and they're leaving somebody else to clean up the mess.
But then, when there was an outcry about that, they then said, oh no, actually, we're going to overrule at the prison service, who had already allowed this. We're going to make that decision. And this is the key thing, and that was when Nicola Sturgeon came unstuck in that fabulous BBC interview, where BBC actually finally got a backbone and recognised this issue, when it became safe for them to do so, with people like you who've been campaigning and speaking up on this issue and facing all the abuse of being called falsely bigot or transphobic or whatever for just talking about women's rights and women's safety and women's existence as something other than a figment of men's imagination. And basically, so once you accept that a trans woman of every kind should not be in a women's prison, you are accepting that trans women are not always women, which is something which, by the way, most people already know and recognise. But politicians still seem to be getting their knickers in a twist about it. Would you accept, say, a non-violent man, so a man who says, actually, it turns out I'm a trans woman, I'd like to go into the women's prison system, and they've been convicted of fraud. They may or may not have had their bits taken off. They may have gone the full surgical route. Would that be acceptable to you?
Not at all. A woman is not a castrated man, to put it bluntly, Julia. Men are still stronger. They've gone through male puberty. There's a different pattern of violence. Most rapists are never reported to the police, let alone convicted. It's a racing certainty that there are more rapists in men's jails who have never been accused to the police of rape than are in there for rape. So the only way to keep rapists out of women's jails is to keep all male people out of women's jails. We understood that 10 years ago.
Very, very well put. Can I ask you just also finally about the SNP leadership race? 3 candidates, Ash Regan, Kate Forbes, Humza Yousaf, all fighting to take over from Nicola Sturgeon. Humza Yousaf's very much seen as sort of the continuity candidate, still in favour of the trans prisoner policy that they've got. Kate Forbes very much against it. She's coming from an evangelical Christian background. Ash Regan, I'm not entirely sure where she stands on this particular issue. But I mean, she set up an independence commission on her first day of the job, and she would not challenge the UK's government decision to block the Gender Recognition Act. So
Ash Regan actually stepped down from the SNP over this policy.
Issue.
She's a woman of principle.
Good point. Yeah, I missed that. Yeah. It's amazing that look, this has brought down the SNP leader. This could bring down other leaders, couldn't it, including Keir Starmer?
It absolutely could. I do not know who they're getting their advice from, either Mark Drakeford or Keir Starmer. They're absolutely not getting good advice. Yeah. This is a policy that leads you into trouble and which ordinary voters really hate.
And particularly women.
Yes, I think men hate it too once they know about it. Most men are not nasty people who want to put rapists into women's jails. They know what men are capable of.
Exactly. Helen Joyce, always so good to talk to you, author of Trans When Ideology Meets Reality.